Good morning. I'm Gabby Morgan from Macmillan Publishers. About 2 years ago, Liz Brownlee came to see me to talk about a brilliant idea she'd had for a book called Shaping the World, 40 Historical Heroes in Verse. I love the idea, and it's been an absolute joy to work with Liz and to read all of the brilliant poems in the book. Thank you for joining us for the official launch of this clever, informative, thoughtful and thought-provoking collection of shape poems in the shape of world shapers. Each poem is paired with a biography, quote and fascinating fact. And we are really lucky this morning to have 15 of the fantastic poets whose brilliant poems are in the book to read and show us their poems. There'll be 3 groups of 5 and we'll have a big round of applause for each group at the end of the section. I'll let you know when you can clap. You'll also be able to ask questions at that point, so do pop them in the chat bar at the side. Liz is going to start our reading today with her poem about Greta Thunberg.
I'm Liz Brownlee, and I'm going to read, first of all, actually, I'd like to thank everybody for coming along, friends, poets, teachers, and young people, and thanks to Miles for his hosting and doing the techie things, which leaves me not to have to worry, and thank you, Gabby, for that lovely introduction. I'm going to read the first poem in the collection about Greta Thunberg. I expect you've all heard about Greta, a schoolgirl in Sweden who became frustrated that governments were not listening to climate scientists. And worst of all, not taking any action to help the climate. She started to strike from school every Friday, and gradually people started to notice her. And until her posts on Instagram and Twitter went viral. And since then, she's inspired millions of school children all over the world to ask their own governments to take some action. So even the smallest person can make a change. Greta Thunberg. When the whole world is deaf by greed and by choice, how do you change things with only your voice? It's hard to be noticed, harder to be heard, but she stood up and spoke, could not be deterred. What made them listen? What cut through their lies? Not the pollution or the fast melting ice, not the experts or science, not hunger or flood, nor the extinctions, our hands red with blood. It was her steady gaze on our planet alight, her desperate calm, her demand, make it right. It's what we'll recall of her fight for our youth, her luminous words, her courage, her truth.
Thank you, Liz, that was amazing. Our next poem is Shakespeare by Matt Goodfellow.
It's great to be in this book. You really don't need me to give you a biography about Shakespeare, do you? Other than to say, very famous, nearly as good a writer as Roger Stevens, died a long time ago, wrote some pretty good stuff. This is a poem called Shakespeare. William, I don't think there's much point in me talking about the big things in this poem. The infinite fame of a glover's son, the plaudits, the much squabbled over amount of invented words, the careful craft of page and stage, the second favourite bed, being born and dying on the same day, also squabbled over. Now, I don't think there's much point in talking about these things. It's been done many times by writers with far more skill than I've got. So let me talk about the little things instead, the things you mean to me. The bite of acid on my lips when I read Iago's words aloud for the first time. The tears on Miss Jones's cheek when we acted out the death scenes of Romeo and Juliet. How you made me want to break down the walls of my stuffy classroom to find the sounds and sweet airs of Caliban's Isle, hold Prospero's staff aloft beneath swirling purple skies. Grandpa's small smile as he whispered, golden lads and girls all must as chimney sweepers come to dust at Grandma's funeral. Yes, I think these things explain it better, these small things. And really, William, to put it as simply as I can, what I mean is this: you're a guiding star, my genius.
Thank you, Matt. And the next poet is Dom Conlon.
Fantastic. So my poem's about Sir John Tenniel, famous illustrator of Alice in Wonderland. But what you might not have known was that he was actually famous at the time for a lot of his social cartoons, his commentary, much in the way that Chris Riddell kind of draws now in The Observer. Sir John Tenniel did the same. So this is my poem. Who drew the grin on an invisible cat? Who drew the cost of the maddest hat? Who drew the tea in a party scene? Who drew the rage in a red-faced queen? Who drew the girl from tall to small? Who drew the grump of an egg on a wall? Who drew the fights of twin fat boys? Who drew the jam that a mouse enjoys? Who drew the tick of a rabbit's clock? Who drew the burble of a jabberwock? Who drew the smoke of an insect's pipe? Who drew the mushroom nice and ripe? Who drew the old man upside down? Who drew the sparkle of a crown? Who drew the book which became perennial? A man by the name of Sir John Tenniel. I thank you.
That was amazing, thank you. Next we have Jandine, who's going to read us her poem about Maya Angelou.
Hello, I'm Jandine, and I was really pleased to be asked to write about Maya Angelou, who is the most amazing African-American writer. She did all sorts of things in a very extraordinary life. She was a film director at one point, and she wrote 7 volumes of her autobiography, a very committed worker for civil rights in America. She had a very, well, quite a difficult childhood. And when she was 8, her mother's boyfriend attacked her. She told her brothers, and the brothers told her uncles, and the man was arrested, but he was only kept in jail for 1 day. When he was released, we don't really know who, but family members attacked this man in retaliation for the fact that he'd only served 1 day in jail, and he died. And Maya Angelou saw the straight line between having said, this man attacked me, and the man being dead, and felt that words were amazingly powerful things, and you had to be careful how you use them. And so she didn't speak again for 5 years. When those 5 years were over, it was a teacher in her school who introduced her to the work of Dickens and the work of other American writers and African-American writers that set her off on the journey that ended with 7 volumes of autobiography, the first of which is called I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. And that's where the beginning of my poem comes from. Hope, she shouts. No cage could hold this burning bird, bright with songs to set the world alight, whose diamond words will wing and shine through dust. She is her voice, rich and honey dark and sweet, strong as the pillars of the earth. She stands outlasting those who stand for ill. Alive in every word she wrote, each syllable a footbeat, heartbeat, drum dance power. Love, she shouts. Find the tool that fits your hand and work a wonder in the world by loving it against the odds. You are enough, she says. Back to Gabby.
Thank you very much, that was wonderful. So next we have Shauna Darling-Robertson reading Otto F. Roeder. Believe this is a film?
That's correct. I will share a video now, and let's try that. Here we go.
Hello, I'm Shauna Darling-Robertson, and I'm really sorry I can't be with you today, but I hope you're having a great time. And speaking of great times, can you remember a time when you discovered something really good and you said, this is the best thing since sliced bread? But did you ever wonder who actually invented sliced bread and when? I'm going to tell you. It was a man called Otto F. Rowetter from Iowa in the United States in 1928, almost 100 years ago. This poem is for him. The man who used his loaf. It's hard making sarnies. It's all chop, cut, dice. And toast's just as tough, even though it tastes nice. Enough of this drudgery. Who'll take the lead? We need an invention to lend us some speed. Otto was up for it. Otto was keen. He drew up some plans for a slicing machine. Now bread is a breeze and we live lives of ease. Otto's the best, every one of us said. The greatest thing ever, at least since sliced bread. And hey, thanks to Otto, we got that new motto. This book, best thing since sliced bread.
Gabby, did you want to?
Yes, that's the end of our first section. So actually, if we can all unmute and have a massive round of applause for Liz, Matt, Dom, Jan and Shauna. Thank you very much. I haven't actually got any questions in the chat yet, so I'm wondering if there are any questions for the poets in this first section. Our second section is starting with Kate Wakelin, who's going to read us her poem about Rosa Parks.
Oh, we do have a question in there now.
We did have a question.
What were the challenges of writing a shape poem which also rhymed?
I'll go with it. I'll answer that one. It's a really good question. And the thing is, for me, it's write the poem first. Worry about the shape later. Get the meter, the rhythm going properly. And then you can always figure out the shape and how it's going to be. With mine, with Sir John Tenniel, I kind of knew it was going to be a bottle. So bottles are quite simple. So it was always going to be kind of straight-ish. It turned into a more of a roundish one. But so that was a fairly simple shape. So I didn't need to worry about it.
Oh, Kingsmead School have asked all of you, how does it feel to share your poems with the world?
It feels amazing. Yeah, it's wonderful, really nerve-wracking, but it's always great to be with people who want to listen to poetry. So I love it. It's great. Fantastic.
Liz, since this is your collection, how does it feel to share the whole book with the world?
It's really fun because I could see it in my mind's eye, but it's really hard to explain to people. And I'm so glad that you could see my vision and took it on. And thank you. Yes, and Dom is absolutely right that the most important thing, of course, is the poem and shaping. If you can't make a shape out of the poem, then that's just it. You can't make a shape out of it. So there was a lot of hair tearing trying to get things to be right, and it took a lot of work, but it is it's been great fun, and it's lovely to see that people are liking it.
Well, I was thinking that actually how extraordinary a skill it is to write poems that good and then produce shapes so clever and so appropriate to the poems. And even though I've worked on this book for a long time, just hearing you all today and looking at the poems, I mean, it's amazing stuff. So thank you very much. Another question here from Mr. Dinnan to everyone. How long did the book Shaping the World take to make?
Well, I suppose that's me again.
Yeah.
It was about 2 years, wasn't it? And I sent first of all, you send out a letter to all the poets you know and say, would you like to send in a poem for this book? And sometimes people say, I don't think I can do a shape poem. Some people said, I can't do a shape poem, but I've got this great poem about so-and-so. And if that was the case, then I tried, if I liked the poem and it fitted in the book, then I'd make the shape for it. It took a lot of work, actually, much more work than a normal book does, because of course the shaping takes a long time. So it did take at least about 7 or 8 months, I think, of just sitting down and doing the shapes. So longer than normal, because normally you work on and off on a book. And then with this one, I was working most of the time.
And how did you choose the people who went into the book? Did people suggest people they'd like to write about, or did you choose them, or was it a bit of both?
I think I sent a list out in the beginning of people that the sort of people that I'd like, but people did send people that were special to them, and that's fine too, because then they, you know, people who, when they feel about somebody, then that poem is much more emotional. Like, and sometimes when the book was coming together, I thought there's a gap here. We need a woman or we haven't got a poet, or we haven't got a teacher, or something like that. And then I'd send out, like I did to Jan, and I asked her if she would mind, because I knew she loved Maya Angelou. So I asked her if she'd write a poem about Maya Angelou, and she came up back with that fabulous poem that you've all heard.
Brilliant. I think maybe we should move on to our next section of poets. We will come back if there are any more questions that we've missed. We'll ask questions in between each section, so we can come back if we haven't got to it now. But I'll introduce you again, Kate. Kate Wakelin is going to read her poem about Rosa Parks.
Hi, everyone. So Rosa Parks was an African-American woman who refused to give up her seat to a white person during the time of racial segregation in America. And she became a really, really powerful figure in the civil rights movement. And it was her brave actions and her
It's 10 o'clock.
Oh,
sorry.
10 o'clock.
Turn it off.
Rosa became a really powerful figure in the civil rights movement, and it was her brave actions and her speeches, which I include a little quote from one of her speeches in the poem, which helped to end the segregation laws in America. I'm not going to read all the becauses that begin this poem, but I'm going to read some of them. Because she sat down to stand up, because she was fierce. Because she burned with a fire of anger and of love. Because she was as strong and brave and true as earth and sky and rock. Because she fought for right against wrong and would not give up. No, 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 not for an instant, not for anything. Because she was deprived of her rights and land, and because she would not that long day be deprived of her seat. Because she would not just surrender. No, she would not move to the back, because she came with hope and faith. Because she said, you must never be fearful about what you are doing when it is right. She said she came armed only with love, because she would not give up, because she would not give up.
Thank you, that was amazing. Next, we have John Doherty with Nelson Mandela.
Hi, yeah, my name is John Doherty, and I chose Nelson Mandela because he's just such a powerful figure in recent history. He was born a black child in South Africa when black people had very, very few rights. They weren't allowed to vote. They weren't allowed to own property. They were treated as less important than white people, as less human than white people. And when he grew up, he joined the fight for equality, and and grew to become one of the leaders. And because of that, the people in charge put him in prison. Now, I hadn't been born yet when Nelson Mandela went to prison. By the time they let him out, I was a grown up. And I remember watching on television the day they released him, and I didn't really know very much about him, but it felt like an incredibly important moment. All kinds of things were changing in the world at that point. You know, countries that had been repressive were becoming freer and were giving more rights to people. And so it was in South Africa. Nelson Mandela held meetings with the president and was one of the reasons that black people got the vote. And then he became president. And what I think is most impressive about him is when he was president, he could have reversed things. He could have said, right, we're going to treat white people the way white people have treated us. And instead he said, no, what's really important here is peace. What's important is bringing together the communities. And that's his legacy. His legacy is as somebody who worked to bring peace where there had been conflict, and to bring freedom where there had been chains. And that's why I wanted to write this poem. And it goes like this. Born into a land of black and white, he learned to see not only shades of grey, but all the colours that would make, someday, a rainbow of his segregated nation. A man of peace, he saw the need to fight, to strike a blow for those who had no voice, then faced the consequences of his choice, a 27-year incarceration. Day linked to day 10,000 times. He wrote, he thought, he learned, he taught. Meanwhile, outside, the world changed. Walls fell, borders opened, so did prison gates. Released, he spoke of peace and strove to understand all those who had oppressed him. Brought to power, he brought the land not bitter justice, not revenge or hate, but truth and reconciliation.
Oh, it's amazing. This is so powerful, these poems. Laura Muka with Alexander Fleming.
Hi, my name is Laura Muka, and I'm a big fan of Alexander Fleming because he wasn't very hygienic. So he went on holiday in 1928, back when we were allowed on holiday. Do you remember that? And he didn't clean up his Petri dishes, which are these like little glass things. And so when he got back, he discovered a gloop that had, I love the word gloop, that had created a bacteria-free circle around itself. So in other words, the gloop, which is the juice from the fungus called Penicillium notatum, destroyed the bacteria. So Fleming decided to call this active substance penicillin, and it was then developed into the first ever antibiotic. Now, this poem is based on the original Petri dish, and I've got a photo on my phone. So I don't know if you can see that. So I literally traced the Petri dish and then made the words fit into the exact shape of the shapes that he came back to on his Petri dish. So even if you haven't been saved by penicillin or another antibiotic, one of your ancestors probably was, and it has saved more than 200 million lives. And it blows my mind. And what I love is that in science, as well as creative things, the mistakes and the accidents can actually lead to the best outcomes. He didn't mean to discover it. He just didn't wash up. Isn't that amazing? Anyway, this isn't really a performance poem. So I'm going to try to do my best to impersonate bacteria and fungus. Don't know if you've ever tried that. Not that easy. I've got a very minimal costume, but I'm going to do it. Hold on. Mold, 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 penicillium mold, mold, mold. What is this pesky thing all blue, green and grumpy? Get out of my dish.
Thank you, Laura, that was amazing. Shall we put Sue's poem back in at this stage? Yeah, is that all right, Sue?
Yeah.
So this is Sue Hardy-Dawson with Amelia Earhart.
Hi. Basically, Amelia and her sister had Amelia was famous for being the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. But possibly this had to do with the fact that she had quite an unusual upbringing and she could run quite wild, and they had all sorts of pets and did all sorts of quite daring things. And she had a sister who she affectionately called Pidge. And the poem I'm about to read is from the point of view of Pidge. Even then, you were the leader, climbing trees, hair streaming, winters belly slamming downhill. No one minds. Instead of posies, we pick worms, make a pet of a tree toad. Moths, katydids, all that with the help of a willing uncle. You plan a homemade ramp, cobbled together, secure it to the roof of the tool shed, ready to launch our own roller coaster. You, after its maiden flight, lips bruised, elated, wearing the medal of a torn dress, splinters of the box that served as a sled. Oh, Pidge, it's just like flying, you said.
Oh, these are wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, I think now is a moment for another round of applause for Kate, John, Laura, and Sue. Thank you very much. Those are amazing readings. We have a few more questions outside here. This is, I would be interested to know this. When you are reading your poems, do you read the actual shape, or do you have a non-shape version of the poem that you read? So I don't know, Laura, what do you do?
I did a voiceover course many years ago, and I was taught in this voiceover course to mark up your text. So you put a line where you want to breathe, you underline the words that you want to emphasize. So sometimes I do that. I didn't do that for this, but I did just type the words out, largely because I don't know if you've tried it, it just takes a lot of energy to be a convincing fungus. And so a fungus, you know, I didn't want to be distracted by the shape of the words. I just wanted the words straight out.
Brilliant. And John, what about you? What do you do? Do you read the shape, or do you have it written out?
Well, in that case, with the Nelson Mandela poem, I read it off the screen. I read the shape because it's written out in the way that you can. I've got another poem in the book about Anne Frank. I'll just hold it up here. And with this one, the words go round the shape of the star. And so to read that one, I'd have to be turning the page. So I think if I was performing that one, I would print it out and read a script version, if you like. But I always like to do the easiest thing. So if it's possible to read it off the shape, that's what I would do.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Just going through here. Somebody has asked a sort of general question about poetry at the moment, and whether we're seeing a rise in interest for poetry for children and young adults. And I have to say, over the last year, there's been an extraordinary interest in poetry. I think being at home and doing school from home and generally trying to communicate with each other, poetry has just been a really great language to communicate with. So I've certainly, as a publisher, seen lots more interest, but I don't know whether as poets you have. I don't know whether what about Sue? Have you seen lots of interest in poetry this year?
I think so. I think there's been a lot more online, a lot more interacting with it. I think the fact that a lot of people have been at home and quite emotionally charged, I think it's become a way for people to both take comfort and to express themselves. So I think it's been a really good time for poetry in that respect.
Actually, Matt, I didn't ask you a question in the last bit. What have you sort of been hearing about poetry? I know you've been doing lots of different bits of work. What things have you been hearing?
Well, I think poetry is one of those things that can make people feel a certain way, and it's a bit of a strange time. And poetry, I think, is certainly for me is something that you can cling to, really, and you can read poems by other people who are also trying to make sense of the world and think, do you know what, somebody else has had that thought that I've had. So yeah, I think poetry is always vital, and especially at times like this. And everybody needs somebody pretending to be mold, don't they?
Can I come in on this one again, Gabby?
Yeah.
Just from another perspective as a writer, because I write fiction as well as poetry, and there have been times this year I've found it really difficult to write. I think we've all been finding things just very, very strange over the last 12 months or so. And when I haven't been able to write other stuff, I get together with some other poets in a Zoom call on a weekly basis, and sometimes we give each other homework. And at times when I can't write anything else, just having a poem to write, having something to write a poem about has been really good for me, and has helped to unlock my creativity.
Yeah, amazing. Liz, we've had a question about what program you use to create the shapes.
Okay, it's Word mainly. Basically, if you put a word into a text box, another little thing opens at the top of your Word document. And in that section, you can find ways of warping words. And that really helps to make your shape. You can make them into curves, and you can start them small and make them go bigger and bigger and go smaller. And you get to know what you can do, basically. There is it's this, I think it's called art. Is it art text, John?
Yes.
John is, some of the poets made their own shapes, and John made his, and he did it on something called art text, which I'd never heard of before, but it did things that Word can't do. So Word is extremely powerful, actually, at being able to do this. So you can do it usually mostly on Word, but if there was a difficult shape which had, for instance, 2 warps in it, you can't do that on Word. So I would use art text. And I'm really pleased that John sent in his shape on our text.
Brilliant. I think we will move on to our final set of poets now, and then we will have more questions after that. So our next poem is by Miles McLeod, and it is by Valentina Tereshkova. Or even about, rather than by.
Yeah, about, yes. I'm not really in a library, so I will share, because I can't share my picture and my face, I will just share my picture with you. I chose Valentina Tereshkova partly because I like astronauts and space. Also, I'm kind of aware of lots of Russian things just because my wife is Russian, and so and I've been trying to learn Russian very, very badly over the last few years. And so, but I was fascinated because Valentina Tereshkova came back into the news because when they were talking about going to Mars, she basically said, "Oh, I'm happy to go, and I don't mind if I don't come back." And I thought that was a really, that was amazing. And also, when I started looking at her mission, that was very interesting. They sent her up with food and water and toothpaste, but no toothbrush. But more crucially, they sent her up with the spacecraft was programmed to ascend, but not to descend. So they had to send her a computer program while she was flying around the Earth in order for her to return safely. So that was why she was part of the reason she was up there for so long. So here is my poem called Chaika, and Chaika is the Russian for seagull, which is her call sign. Chaika, Valentina Tereshkova, flew her Vostok module over Earth in June of '63. When she launched, she said with glee, "Hey, sky, take off your hat, I'm coming." Or, if you'd like your Russian true, "Ye neba, snimi shlapu, ya idu." And so the seagull soared, stargazing. 3 days, 48 orbits later, she drove her rocket back to vapor. Her dad had driven tractors, later tanks, so never saw his Vladimirovna thanked with a Soviet outburst for being the first woman in space. Hero, ace. Years later, missions to Mars are mooted, and Valentina says she'll be booted, suited, and take a one-way Cosmo climb to be the first a second time.
Amazing. That's fantastic. Yes. A lovely fact about her is that when she was doing that, she told her mother she was going on a parachuting course, and then her mother saw her on television. She didn't want to worry her. The next poem is by Cheryl Moskowitz, and it is Frances Glessner Lee.
Thank you, and thank you, Gabby and Liz, for bringing this amazing book together. It's such a treat to hear everybody's poems. So yes, my poem is about Frances Glessner Lee, who was the first female police captain in America. And she was born in Chicago, which is also where I was born. So that made me particularly interested in her. She was also really good at making things, especially just being resourceful with what she had. And that my grandma and my mum are both very good at making things, sewing, doing all this. So that made me extra interested in her. Frances Glessner Lee was a forensic scientist. So she was interested in crime, especially murder. Not actually committing the murders, but solving them. So she invented this special way of doing this. She built lifelike models from materials that she could find that were as close as she could to the real thing. And she recreated every detail in miniature, like making a doll's house. She called these dioramas, and these dioramas made it easier to gain a wider perspective and find out what really happened. She became famous for being able to solve these crimes in a nutshell, which is also the title of my shape poem. My poem is going to require a bit of detective work to actually be able to read it. So my hint is to use a ruler. Here's the poem in a nutshell. Look inside this diorama. See the unmade bed, a half-drunk cup of coffee, the victim lying dead. The living room all quiet, plumped up cushions on the chair. Peek beyond the open doorway. There's bloodstains on the stairs. There's mayhem in the attic, disturbance in the barn, and in the parsonage parlor, someone's come to harm. In minuscule dimensions, she made it possible to see. I'm making murder visible, said Frances Glessner Lee. In a scientific manner, crime has been my life. It's not the doing, but the solving it that has to be just right. The window latch, the door frame, the way the body fell, the trinkets in the cabinet, the pictures on the walls, pencils made from toothpicks, lights that really work, the dolls made soft and heavy to feel just like a corpse. With expert eye and tweezers in miniature 3D, she exacted every detail to the tiniest degree. Even in a nutshell, murder's hard to comprehend. These dollhouse-scaled creations help detectives understand. Each clue must be examined to solve a mystery. That's it, in a nutshell, says Frances Glessner Lee.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. This is fascinating. I am learning every time I go through this book. I just learn so much. Thank you all. Our next poem is by Susie Levinson, and it is about Benjamin Franklin.
Hi, everybody. I'm Susie Levinson. As you could probably tell from my accent, I am not from England. I'm from America, and I decided to write a poem about one of the founding fathers of the United States, Benjamin Franklin, who he's famous for that. But I think the reason why I love Benjamin Franklin so much is because he's so much more than that. He had such a brilliant, curious mind and really no limitations. I mean, if I were to list everything that Benjamin Franklin did, well, we'd be here for a long time, but he was, let's see, he was a scientist, he was an inventor, he was a philosopher, he ran a newspaper, edited and printed it, he started a university that I ended up attending a couple of centuries later, he started the first fire department in Philadelphia. He, wow, he could really go on and on. His inventions went from, there was a glass harmonica. He invented the Franklin oven. He invented the lightning rod, which was a result of his famous kite experiment, which is what I wrote about, where he tried to prove that lightning was electricity by going out on a stormy night with a kite connected to a key and absorbing the energy with this tool called a Leyden jar. It was a pretty wild thing to do. He was a pretty wild kind of guy. So here's the poem, The Kite Experiment. A metal key, a silken kite, a length of wire, a stormy night, a Leyden jar, a wetted string, electric fire, a lightning zing. His mind unlocked a shocking thing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. He sounds incredible. Our next poem is by Penny Kent and is about Ravi Shankar.
Hello everyone, I'm Penny Kent. I lived in India for 3 years, so I'm really excited to be talking to you about Ravi Shankar today. Indian sitar player Ravi Shankar became established as a master composer in the West and collaborated with major conductors and musicians worldwide. But I love what Beatle George Harrison said about him. What I liked about Ravi was that although on the one side he was a great classical musician, at the same time he was fun. With Ravi, there was always a lot of happiness and laughing. And because I was a huge Beatles fan in my teens, I also love what Ravi Shankar said about the Beatles. All my young nieces and nephews were gaga about the Beatles. And when they heard I'd met them, they were so excited. Many of the Beatles' songs and melodies were beautiful. But because I'm older myself now, I especially love what his daughter Anushka said of her father when he was 83. His music and live performances are better than ever. You can see his age, he's frail, and you're very aware of him being an old, tired man. And then he gets on stage and instantly, once he starts playing, his face has this kind of glow to it. He's kind of on fire. So I'm going to read the poem straight from the book. His fingers blurred, they flew so fast and crawled among the frets. His sitar sprinkled falling stars and growled low, sad regrets. His fingers stretched the sitar strings and plucked inspiring snaps. His sitar chimed with jangling twangs and danced with tabla taps. His music soared from India, and the Beatles swelled his fame. His sitar spun new ragas. Ravi Shankar was his name.
That was amazing, thank you. Yes, that was fantastic. Our final poem in this section, and in fact our final poem today, is by Roger Stevens and is about Beethoven.
Hello, am I here? Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Yes, my poem is about Beethoven, and one of his, Beethoven was one of our greatest, the world's greatest classical composers. He wrote about 200 years ago. And he wrote a sonata called the Moonlight Sonata. And I hadn't planned to say this, but because Penny mentioned the Beatles, one of John Lennon's greatest songs, which is called Because, he always claimed was Moonlight Sonata. He based it on the Moonlight Sonata, but he reversed the tune. So he said it was the Moonlight Sonata being played backwards. However, that's by the by. Just thought I'd mention that. A sonata is a piece of music written in 3 movements. And the Moonlight Sonata is the first of 3 movements of a sonata called Sonata number 14. So it was Sonata number 14. And then the first piece, the Moonlight Sonata, is very, very slow and very, very quiet. And if you look at the music for it, it says on the music to play it very, 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 very quietly. And it gets up as loud as very quiet. So it's very, very quiet indeed. The second movement is a bit faster. And the third movement is absolutely amazing. And if you get a chance to have a look on YouTube at somebody playing the third movement, it is just so fast. It is absolutely frenetic. It's an amazing piece of music. So check it out. And it was actually not called the Moonlight Sonata while Beethoven was alive. It was about 5 years after he died. This is about 200 years ago, that a music critic, because they had music critics 200 years ago, decided that the first movement reminded him of the moon glittering on Lake Lucerne. And he gave it the name, really, the Moonlight Sonata. Anyway, here it is. Ludwig configures a tune that will move the emotions of millions of lovers and friends, a dark sky cantata. Watch the ripples and shimmers of stars on the lake as they dance in the magical night of the Moonlight Sonata.
That was amazing, thank you. We can have a big round of applause for Miles, Cheryl, Susie, Penny and Roger. Thank you very much. Got a few more, one more sort of round of questions. So do put your questions in the chat if you have a question. But we've got a question here. Marcus has asked, and I think Kate, if you want to answer this one. Marcus has asked, how do you feel when you know you're inspiring other people to write poetry?
Oh, what a great question. Yes, for me, that there's no greater dream than thinking that other people might be writing because of something I might have written. Yeah, I feel like there's the idea that the energy that I might feel in writing a poem gets passed along through those words and sparks a new poem in somebody else is all I wish for.
Fantastic, thank you. And Jan, how about you?
Yes,
yes.
Having spent a lot of years going into primary schools and doing things, nothing I like better than to see somebody thinking, yes, I can do that. I don't think there's a better feeling than saying to someone, yes, you can do that, and giving them a little nudge and saying, off you go, and watching them sail off into the adventures of writing a poem.
And sometimes actually writing poems with other people at the same time
yes.
is fantastic fun. So if you're in a school, if you're watching this and you're in a classroom, get together with maybe 2 or 3 of your friends and write something together. Or why don't you make yourselves a little book of poems? Maybe a class book of poems, or just a little group of friends. You can call yourselves the amazing poets from Dagenham or wherever you come from. Make a little book. It's fantastic. Just sharing is the thing, I think.
Actually, yeah, you could do a shape.
Can I
answer of your whole class? Yes, you can. Yeah.
Can I say something about Marcus's question as well?
Yeah.
It's a really great question, Marcus, and I just wanted to kind of respond to what Gabby said after hearing some of the poems, how she was learning so much as well. And I think what's so exciting and inspiring about writing poems, sharing them with other people, and hopefully inspiring other people to write poems is that in writing poems, you do learn so much about the subject that you're writing, but in a different way than you learn in the classroom, because you get excited about how you can bring that subject to life. And I think poetry really brings subjects to life and feelings to life, and so I'd be thrilled if hearing these poems and reading other poems make you inspired to write your own poems as well, because we'll be learning from you.
Brilliant. Miles, have you got anything to add to that?
I know my brain is completely fried from spotlighting and unspotlighting everything.
It's all right.
That's right. I would say
pass
that,
on that.
but I always liked poetry, and yes, I think I started with quite small poems as well, because as a child I loved reading. I had a collection of poems which I don't have in front of me, but I remember really liking, like, for example, just Spike Milligan's extremely short poems, and thinking, oh, I can try that because it's not really long and terrifying. And so I would start with trying to write something short and funny, and actually then that allowed me to think, oh no, I can actually do this. So yeah.
Brilliant. Susie, have you written shape poems before, or was this a first?
This was my very first successful attempt at a shape poem. If you'll notice, my shape was rather simple. It was a good way to start with a kite shape, and because the poem really came to me before the shape, but it was pretty convenient that I was able to just do it on Word in a simple kite shape.
But that's fantastic, and that shows you actually how fantastic it is to create shape poems. And actually, as you say, if you can find a simple shape, it doesn't matter if it works and it fits the theme of your poem. So that's brilliant.
It's so fun. It's almost like doing a puzzle. I highly recommend it. I'll be doing it again.
Yep. There's a question, Gabby, there's a question there. Which poem was the most difficult to shape on?
Yes, Liz, I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
Which I can tell you. Well, there's two actually, and they're both Jan's. That was one of them that you've already seen, the bird. That was really difficult. And the other one, which I found quite hard, was the dragon, because dragons are surprisingly tricky to shape and draw. I can't draw a dragon. It took me.
I'm sorry.
Looks amazing.
The other thing about dragons is dragons just don't like to be confined. Dragons are just their own.
I think that's what it was. It was
Very
awful trying to capture those words and put them on the page. It just kept trying to fly away, but I managed it in the end, I think.
I was just going to have one last question for Penny and say, have you done lots of shape poems before, or is this a new thing for you as well?
I have done a few shape poems before, and the thing I love best about shape poems is that they're a kind of art form as well as language. It's combining language and art, and I love art as well. So that's for me very, very doubly exciting. I just find the whole process of working out the language and then how to create the shape and how to put the two together thrilling. It's a wonderful thing. I would advise everybody to have a go. Just do it, pencil and paper, fun.
Fantastic. I think we have come to the end of this fantastic launch and event, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. And can we have another huge round of applause for Liz, Matt, Sue, Jan, Shauna, Kate, John, Laura, Dom, Miles, Cheryl, Susie, Penny, and Roger. Thank you so much. Thank you for myself. And thank you very much for joining us this morning.